Earlier today, I spoke with Pennsylvania Democratic Senator John Fetterman on how he views the state of the war and a lot of other topics. Please listen. You support President Trump's decision to launch this war with Iran. How do you think it's going?
Well, I think, first, I think it makes me the only Democrat in the Senate that supports that, perhaps maybe even in the entire Congress. So, but yes, that's true. And I think overall, what's accomplished is remarkable. And I would like to remind everybody listening that every single Democratic presidential candidate, and every single Democrat that I'm aware of, demands to make sure that Iran could never acquire a nuclear weapon. And it's very clear that was their ambition, and also developing a missile technology to make it possible to deliver those kinds of weapons to Israel for sure, and perhaps even eventually our country. And everything's tried. Multiple presidents through their administrations have tried this. Negotiation, treaties, all other kinds of techniques to work through our allies in the region and cajole them. No incentives. So it made that a fact necessary, I think. Kamala Harris, while she was running for president, she identified Iran as her top concern, internationally her top concern. And so when someone does that, it happens to be a very polarizing figure in the Democratic Party to produce that outcome that we all would want. Now, that's why I think it's reasonable to support that. Now, I'm also aware of how punishing it is as a Democrat to agree with him on anything.
The president.
Yeah, the president. And so I think whether that's country over party or the kinds of world security where we're at, and remind people as well that what's happened since that started, it's been a dramatic impact on the Iranians' ability to essentially even respond at this point.
So you think it's going well, the war?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure it's the right word I would choose for war, but I do think it's very effective, and I do think it's moving towards the kinds of appropriate outcome.
As we're speaking today, the president told Axios there's practically nothing left to target in Iran, and the war will end, direct quote, soon. Does that sound good to you?
I mean, I'm sure there are some things, but it's also undeniable that Iran really never had the kind of capabilities to respond. Since it started, it's been 10 days. 10 days,
12 days.
12 days. I think if they really have a shot to shoot, they probably would have done it by now. And now they're essentially, they had to resort to targeting other nations in the region and to try to disrupt some of the oil trade, and that's happening. But overall, they've been unable to inflict any significant damage on American assets or in Israel at this.
Let me talk to you about the standoff over DHS funding, Department of Homeland Security. Nicole Skanga, one of my colleagues, reported that since the shutdown began of DHS funding, 300 TSA officers have quit. There are lots of longer lines at airports.
Actually, I didn't know that. I didn't know 300.
300 have quit just since the shutdown began. That's going to make it harder to refill those. It takes 4 to 6 months. Long lines are getting longer. How does this end?
Yeah, well, I travel and I fly through the airport virtually every week of the year. And just last week, actually, this was filmed. I asked every agent that I encountered, hey, do you like getting paid to work? Shockingly, they all agreed, yeah, that's great to do that. And I said, well, I'm the one Democrat, again, to be the one guy to refuse to do that. How can you be a Democrat that says, let's make some reform on ICE? We all agree. Minneapolis was a disaster. That should never have ever happened. In fact, later today, this is being filmed. I'm going to have an opportunity to sit down with Senator Mullen, who's going to be the next director of DHS.
Mark Wayne Mullen from Oklahoma.
Yeah, exactly. my friend and someone that I respect, and I do believe that he could be the kind of person that I could work with. Now, just remind, America signed up for secure our border, focus and deport all the criminals, and no more tragedies like in Minneapolis, and to make those kinds of appropriate reforms. So I'm not sure why that's more difficult to be a Democrat, because I feel, to me, that it's doesn't feel unreasonable to say that not punish people like TSA agents and the Coast Guard and other people that were not involved in any of it.
But votes have to be found. How are votes going to be found to get this spending approved?
For the war? If there's
no, for DHS funding to end this.
Of course, yeah. I've been the only one to.
But how do you get your Democratic colleagues to change?
I don't know. I can't speak for them, but we can all agree that it would have no impact on ICE or the kinds of reforms that we all agree. It's illogical to punish innocent people that were not involved on the tragedy of Minneapolis that triggered it. So that's impossible to allow two things to be true to coexist.
What is your feeling about the president's hard emphasis on the so-called Save America Act?
Well, there's a couple truths embedded in this conversation too. I don't support in its current state to vote Save America. And the president is constantly critical on mail-in voting, and that's ridiculous. It's safe. Some of the best examples in the country are from red states like Ohio and Florida, of course. And now I have a unique perspective on that too, as in 2019, as I was lieutenant governor, the Republicans in Pennsylvania pushed for mail-in voting. They forced us to give up the straight party line. That was one of two states in the country at that time, because that's what they wanted. And then immediately the president decided that's wrong. Then now they had to walk back and explain why unanimously every single Republican voted for that in 2019. So that's why I can't ever vote for that, because I could never agree something that's just not true. Now, there's also another truth that I believe 83% of Americans think that it's reasonable to show ID to vote. And many, many states already do those things. Exactly. And I cite what happened in the Wisconsin election last year. And they elected a very liberal justice for the Supreme Court, but they also nearly 2-1 voted to put that in the Constitution, show basic ID to vote. The world did spin off the axis, and I think we could agree they're going to have a safe there. So if the Republicans would ever just make it showing basic state ID to vote, hey, I'm not going to tell 83% of Americans that they're wrong or that they are Jim Crow people. That's that. And also the reason why the SAVE Act will never pass, because the filibuster. But including myself, we all ran in 22 to get rid of the filibuster, deliver it. But now we find ourselves as Democrats, we love the filibuster. We cling to that. So that's other part of there. So if someone, I tried to buy a wine if anyone familiar with Sheetz, and they're like, no. I'm like, they even knew who I was. And they're like, well, no ID. I didn't have any ID. So I walked away empty pockets. Showing ID, the vast majority of Americans, everyone should have one. Why, I think many people should realize that, that's basic to participate in so many parts of American society. And now most states, including mine, has a free state ID. And if they do make it mandatory, then every state should also mandate to have free, basic
that meet the requirement of voting.
Exactly.
The president, at the direction of the president, this version in the Senate also has some transgender amendments. Mm-hmm. Are those problematic to you?
For me, I've always been a Democrat that refuses to kind of pick on or signal out that community. I was the first person elected in Pennsylvania back in 2013. If you remember, it was illegal. Same-sex marriage was illegal. And the governor at that time threatened to arrest me if I performed or solemnized a same-sex marriage, and I did that. And I'm like, hey, they know where I live, and I believe in that kinds of equality. And that entire community now, I refuse to target that or pick on that. It's difficult enough for transgenders kids, so I think this is the wrong venue to discuss it nationally, make it global, and further kinds of drag them into this kinds of things. So I think it's a very personal choice for parents and their children about it. And then I think it's increasingly going to become a more local or maybe state kinds of decisions.
Does it feel to you that the president's jamming those two issues into this legislation in order to amplify the politics?
Well, yeah, of course. They're trying to make it more like a statement. So, as a Democrat, I'm making a statement, but I think it's pretty reasonable and something we could agree. Now, if he wants something that has a chance of passing, or he could make a more cogent argument, make it just a basic, straight, basic fundamental state ID, or can you explain why voting by mail is corrupt or problematic? Well, then you're actually criticizing many of your own states and many of your own constituents that use that.
And the way you were reelected.
Yeah, well, exactly, yeah. And also, you damage your own credibility when you have no problem with the election if you win, but the only time you have a problem or where it's like if you didn't. He had no problem with it in 2016. I don't recall him ever being upset. And certainly everybody, he never had a problem with the outcome in 24. So that's where we are.
That was the news of the day, part of my conversation with Senator Fetterman. We had a much longer conversation, much of it about his book, Unfettered, in which he speaks with great rawness and candor about his struggle with clinical depression. For that interview, you can catch it on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, and I recommend it to you highly.